Shukra Darshak, Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to the conversation with me, Talha Ahmed. No doubt you are aware of the political hypes at this moment in time. Yesterday, Parliament voted for a new bill, Internal Markets Bill, and that bill has caused quite a bit of stir. Many accuses that this bill is an attempt, or rather a pathway for UK government ministers to be absolved, to be excused from scrutiny, if I could put it that way. Some also argue that this bill lays the foundation for breaching certain international law. In particular, there are concerns that this bill may pave the way for breaching some of the articles of the EU Withdrawal Act, which was passed in January. There are also concerns as to how this may impact on the Union, that is, the relationship between the four nations within the United Kingdom, England, Scotland, Wales and Ireland. So we will be discussing these issues, along with also touching briefly on reports that government is considering to withdraw from some of the human rights obligations that UK has historically been party to. To discuss these issues, we've got two distinguished guests with us in studio and joined via video link. Before I introduce them to you, may I remind you that this program is very much for you. We are here and aspire to express your views, to raise your questions and to address any concerns that you may have. And on that spirit, if you wish to speak to us live join us live on studio, you can call us on the number that you will see on TV screen from time to time. You can also watch this program on our Facebook page, TV1 UK. TV1 UK Facebook page would enable you to watch it live now, but also at convenient time to you. Those of your friends who are not in Britain or does not have Sky, they can watch this program on Facebook either now live or at a later stage. Without any further delay, may I introduce our guest for today. We are joined in studio by Mumshad Afroz, a Conservative Party activist and Assistant Vice President of Nikko Asset Management. Mumshad, welcome to our show.
Thank you very much for inviting me, Talha.
We're also joined by Professor Bill Bowring, Professor of Law at Birkbeck College, University of London. Bill, welcome.
Thank you. Good evening. Thanks for inviting me.
Bill, can I start with you? There's much discussion about this internal markets bill, which will go to a second reading now. I mean, on the face of it, the bill doesn't appear to be remarkable in its stated narrative as to what this bill seeks to achieve. So why has it caused so much of a controversy? Why has it attracted so much attention?
Well, I think Ed Miliband made a good point in his speech yesterday, which was that what this bill has managed to do is to unite the 5 living former prime ministers, all of them, Labour and Conservative, in totally opposing it on the grounds that it already breaches international law. And that's what the Northern Ireland Secretary said in Parliament in answer to a question from Bob Neill. So he said, I mean,
it was extraordinary, of course, for Brandon Lewis to say not that it may, but that it will break international law.
It does already.
So,
simply, yeah.
Do you just want to, I mean, I'm trying to understand how exactly does it break international law?
Because what Johnson announced as a fantastic and oven-ready deal in time for the election last year is a international treaty. So it was signed by both sides. And one of the most important principles of international law, which I teach, is that it's called in Latin, pacta sunt servanda. That is, that you've got to stand by the legally binding agreements that you reach. You can't just say, well, I didn't understand it properly, which is what Johnson seems to be saying now.
But what I don't understand, Bill, excuse me if I sound not very knowledgeable on this, but I hear what you say, and our viewers will no doubt agree that we should honor international commitments. But
Well,
how
absolutely.
does it actually break? I mean, what aspects of this bill breaches which aspect of the withdrawal act?
Because what Johnson did actually, in order to get a deal signed in time for the election last year, was to agree with what he had previously rejected, which is the deal which Theresa May had negotiated. So Johnson finally went along with it. That is that Northern Ireland stays effectively in the EU, so that there's no hard border between Northern Ireland and the Republic. And that creates all manner of problems, of course, between Northern Ireland and the United Kingdom. And so, as Miliband pointed out yesterday, Johnson appears not to have read the treaty which he put forward as a fantastic deal and oven ready. Now he says, actually, it's not so perfect and not oven ready. And so he wants a get out. And the get out he wants is to be able to say, well, if it turns out to be difficult, oh, actually, I didn't really mean it. And when I signed it, I had my fingers crossed behind my back, effectively. And the trouble with that is, as people have said all over the world, actually, you can read in the press everywhere what people in government are saying. If Britain is a country which wants to make a whole lot of international deals once we're completely out of the EU, then if we're seen as a country which can't be trusted to keep its word, that is not going to be very good.
Thank you. Momshad, breaking international law is a serious step, and for any nation, honoring their commitment, treaty commitments are of vital importance in international diplomacy. More so for our country, which rightly prides itself for being a country governed by rule of law. So why would a government led by your party bring such act?
Sure. Let me bring clarity to my own personal position, is that we have to stand by any treaty to which we are a counterparty. I think it's very important for our international standing and also for our own credibility as an independent nation that wants to obviously aim high in the post-Brexit environment. So that's the first thing. The second thing is, it's a question of, what we actually signed up in the actual Withdrawal Agreement Act. And I think the two specific areas which have become quite contentious are the state aid and the export declaration, which seems to contradict the specific clauses incorporated within the Withdrawal Act. Now, I'm not a legal expert, but having scanned, read through the actual bill, to my knowledge, I don't think it's a flagrant breach. What it does, it's testing the law to its limit, and I think that's not abnormal in the sense, if you're trying to get clarity or refinement on a particular clause within an international treaty where there are grey areas.
I mean, you say it's not a flagrant breach, but
which aspect would you say is a
well,
flagrant
we'll come to the
breach?
aspect, but
I think devils are in the details. You've got to, if you're opining on a matter of law, then you've got to bring specific clarity, or your questions have to be a bit more forensic rather than discussing
let me
an
ask you this.
abstract
I mean,
term.
your own Secretary of State for Northern Ireland, Brandon Lewis, when he was asked, he said, this does break international law, but said only in a very specific and limited way. So the extent of the breach may be debated, but he accepted that it does break international law, and that's a serious step to take.
Okay, so for us to ascertain or to say that the internal market bill breaches what we have signed up to in the withdrawal agreement,
Yeah.
you need an impartial body to preside over it, right? So
Yeah.
at the moment, it is the interpretation of the European Union and the UK government. So we have to obviously go through some form of arbitration to actually establish.
But do you not find it troubling that...
I do find it troubling, and I've said I have some misgivings because I think it could potentially do a great deal of damage, if we are perceived not to be able to honor, something that we have signed up as a nation. And I don't think that is the intention of the Prime Minister. The Prime Minister wants to maintain the integrity of the UK as a whole. And to be able to do that in a post-Brexit environment, we have to ensure that the devolved nations are leveled through our economic programs. So say, for example, one of the things that we are quite often accused by the SNP and the Welsh Assembly that, even though, they have devolved powers, the powers don't go far enough to allow them to actually undertake a series of radical programs to invigorate the regional economies. So in response to that, obviously, UK government is now considering a UK development fund to replace the EU development fund.
I mean, they're also concerned about that, but we'll come to that in a minute. Bill, we were governed in respect of most, in terms of market, for example, in relation to market, we were governed by EU laws for all these years because we were part of the European Union. We are now coming out of the European Union, and once we do, UK, especially the four nations, they do need a way to trade between themselves without barrier, without difficulty. And this act seeks to unify, or rather bring together a set of rules so that there are no frictions between different parts of our country. What's wrong with that?
I'd say that this bill is not about that at all. Actually, what it's all about is the concession that was made by Boris Johnson, as I say, before the election last year, in respect of Northern Ireland. And that's the key thing. I mean, it's very interesting on Newsnight the other night to watch Mr. Bone, who is an ardent Brexiteer, saying that really what it's all about is fish. I think fish is actually a minor issue. And I think if it's said to be about some aspects of food regulations, well, but I think the real difficulty is that the deal that was done and the treaty that was signed back in the end of last year is supposed to put us in a position where at the end of this month and at the end of this year, we're not plunged into a situation where there are queues of thousands of lorries at Dover. I mean, that is really what we have to avoid at all costs. And I think on the question of the union, as a matter of fact, when you listen to the SNP, now the SNP, of course, now rules Scotland. My own party, the Labour Party, absolutely lost. We were thrown out of Scotland. And that means to say that the Labour Party, of course, is in a much more difficult position wishing to take power in the future. But every day that passes seems to bring closer another referendum for Scottish independence. And also, what's going on in respect of Ireland leads inexorably in the direction of a border poll, and the question which the Good Friday Agreement left open, which is the possible unification of Northern Ireland and the Republic. If that was to happen, of course, they would be in the EU,
But
And it's
one of the issue, I mean, the Attorney General thought the bill was okay. Lord Chancellor also seems to be comfortable with the bill. The majority of our MPs think it's okay. So
well,
why
I
not
think
have
a
it?
lot of them, a lot of senior MPs abstained.
I mean, how do you decide senior? All MPs are MPs.
No, what I'm talking about is when you think about the present cabinet, these are relatively new people, and in order to get his position through in Parliament, Johnson, as we know, effectively threw out a whole lot of people with experience of being ministers and that kind of thing. We now have an Attorney General with no experience whatsoever, who's been confronting the Bar Council recently, and these are the senior barristers, basically saying, this is really extremely dangerous. So a lot of really well-known big figures in the Conservative Party have been going very public, saying that they really can't go along with this. Now, only 2 of them voted against last night, but a lot more abstained. And the
But
very
even
strong
after that, you had 77 MPs, 77 majority. But we'll come to you, Bill, in a minute.
We'll see what happens. So if I could just say one more thing, which is that we've got the amendments now, and it looks very much as if Robert Neal or one of these people on the Conservative side is going to have an amendment which a lot of Conservatives will vote for. Now, whether Johnson will lose his majority, I doubt very much, but I think it puts the government in a very difficult position.
Momshad, you had a Secretary of State who admitted in Parliament that it breaks the law. You have former Attorney Generals who took serious issue with this bill. You have all living prime ministers coming very strongly against it. Surely that must make you feel very nervous that your government would bring a bill that unites so many people in their rejection of this.
Well, I think it's a difficult job. You're trying to balance and respect what you signed up to in the form of the withdrawal agreement versus maintaining the integrity of the UK as a whole, as well as ensuring that we have frictionless trade between the 4 nation states. That is absolutely imperative in maintaining that integrity. Now, if you have different playing fields in terms of the regional economies and the way they interact amongst themselves, then that will ultimately lead to the disintegration of the UK. So I think Professor Bill has pointed out in regards to the Northern Ireland, if which a lot of people are saying purportedly goes against the spirit of the Good Friday Agreement, then obviously that could be a potential outcome. But if you look at the details, I really don't think this is what it's seeking to achieve. If anything, it's the opposite, because can I just opine on this? What does the Good Friday Agreement state? What was the political declaration? What was the spirit behind it?
Tell us.
It's to ensure that there was no hard border between the
Ireland of Ireland
exactly and the
Northern Ireland.
Right. So and I think it does that. And the withdrawal agreement ensures that there are no hard border.
Yeah, but that's precisely the point. This act potentially, what UK government is doing is that when they were negotiating the withdrawal act, at that time when they were reaching their treaty, they assured the EU and brought in legislation to enable that. And so essentially Northern Ireland was given a very special status in terms of remaining within the wider EU legislations and so on, to enable them to have the same standards as the EU.
Not remain within the European Union. I think we acknowledged and we conceded there will be, some absorption of the EU law within the Northern Ireland Assembly, but there was also a recognition that the Northern Ireland Assembly will largely still preside within the legal framework of UK legislation. Now, I don't know why the state subsidy is such a contentious issue.
It's not the state subsidy itself.
Why EU has such a big problem with
that? No. I think you're misconstructing the issue here. The issue isn't the state subsidy. The issue, there's two potential issues. One is that this internal market bill gives disproportionate power to UK ministers to make decisions. Second, it gives them authority to override EU authority. For example, EU rules, the judgment of the European Court. In relation to Northern Ireland, that's particularly problematic because it will make it impossible for Northern Ireland not to have hard borders between Ireland and Northern Ireland.
No, it doesn't, because most of it was around the customs arrangement, which we have dealt with. And
so this does away, this undo.
No, this is not a power grab as some people are trying to portray it as.
How is it not?
It isn't a power grab, because what it's trying to do is to create a level playing field amongst the different regional economies, and to allow the UK government to channel the funds into infrastructure projects, which are so desperately needed in many parts of those devolved government to really turbocharge the local economies. Now, EU, squaring up to the UK government and trying to create these obstacles, it isn't really helpful. I think we've got to start from a point of reconciliation.
Well, okay, let's not go to the EU. I mean, we're still talking about...
Why not? They're the counterpart.
No, I mean, we're still talking about internal...
be part of that discussion. You can't...
We're talking about 3 former prime ministers of your party who has serious issues with this bill. Immediate past Attorney General of your own party who has issues. But let me go to Bill again. I mean, Bill, the country voted to leave the European Union. And so it's inevitable that within the UK government will rule supreme. Surely anything other than that is an anomaly with what the country has decided.
Well, shall I tell you what I think is really ironical at the moment, which is that the position of my party, of Keir Starmer, is now get Brexit done. And the big irony is, actually, what Johnson has done is throw a big spanner into the works.
How so?
It's almost because the reaction all over the world, not just in Europe, and in his own party, as well as you just rightly pointed out, is actually we're very close to the end of the road on actually, definitively leaving the EU. The position of the Labour Party under the new leadership is that, well, let's go on with it. And that we need to get Brexit done with a deal. And
right.
Really, I mean, what he's been doing in the last few days, to everyone's complete astonishment, by the way, I mean, nobody saw this one coming, on either side of the English Channel. Really, he's made what he's done, or what I think Dominic Cummings has done, because I think it's Dominic Cummings who's calling the shots.
I mean, Cummings is not on our show, so we better watch what we say. Bill, we're going to... I have to stop you there because we are going to take a break. After the break, we would look at some of the specific issues. For example, the provisions being brought in that bill with regards to funding projects within different parts of the UK, and also how that presents a potential problem.
So looking forward to that.
But we will also look at some of the other unspoken or rather unwritten motives behind this bill. But until then, we will take a short break, and until then, please do stay with us. Welcome back to the conversation. You're watching TV1's flagship current affairs discussion program with myself, Talha Ahmed. We apologize for a slight technical glitch just a moment ago. We are discussing the withdrawal act that gone through, withdrawal bill rather, internal market bill rather, that passed through Parliament last night. All the living former prime ministers has expressed concern about this passage of this bill. A number of the former attorney generals has also expressed their concern, and the whole political landscape in our country has been dominated by discussion around this bill. This is because many say that passage of this bill renegates on our promise made to the European Union in the form of the treaty that we reached as part of leaving the EU, and also it undo aspects of the act that was passed subsequently, the Withdrawal Act in January. And we were discussing some of that earlier, but one of the issues that came repeatedly, and the issue that Momshad mentioned, was that part of this bill is designed to create a fund for UK government to provide funding for development in different parts of the UK, including in Scotland and others. And the idea is to replace funding that would come from the European Union. Bill, if I come to you, I mean, surely that's a good thing, the bill making provisions for UK government, demonstrating UK government's commitment to contribute to the development of different parts of the UK, especially places such as Northern Ireland and in some ways Scotland, because of their geographical locations, because of their particular history. There are serious, significant economic challenges, and UK government support should only be a good thing.
I think brilliant thing. However, the issue is that in the EU, there was a lot of funding for Northern Ireland, for Scotland, for deprived parts of England from the EU. So I think there'd be no problem in the government making up that funding, which I think it needs to do. I think the issue with the EU, though, is could there be state aid and state subsidies for British industries and manufacturing, enabling them to undercut European competitors? And I think that would be a problem. And I was reading yesterday something.
But why should that be a problem? I mean, we are coming out of the EU.
So we've just done a trade deal with Japan. And everyone's saying, oh, brilliant, this is the first really good trade deal. When you look at it, the restrictions on state aid and state subsidy are much tougher than the European Union. Why? I'm sure because Japan wants to protect its own industries and economy. Therefore, it's a trade deal with the UK, but the conditions are that the UK is not to start one-sidedly subsidizing industry, manufacturing, and so on. So I think that's the real issue, that when we talk about level playing field, it's that the United Kingdom should continue, or the region should continue to benefit in the way that they did under the European Union. Boris Johnson has been talking a lot about levelling up. You know, that's one of his slogans, as it were. But what the EU does not want is that there's going to be significant undercutting and dumping, if you like, and subsidizing, so that British manufacturers and industry and services have an unfair advantage in Europe. And therefore, that's why I think it's really
those would be issues. Surely those would be issues for negotiation between the UK and the EU as we try to reach a more lasting treaty. I mean, that's what the government is going through at the moment, isn't it? Negotiating a trade deal with the European Union, and part of the trade deal would look into the provisions of state subsidies.
So, but I think the EU is very, very clear that the UK is out of the EU, but it must, if there's going to be a trade deal, then it will be a trade deal of the kind which Japan has just insisted on, and which we're entering into. with really tough restrictions on the ability of the state through subsidies and aid to undercut competitors. I mean, that's normal in a trade deal.
Thank you. Mumshad, coming back to you again, you mentioned several times power does not go far enough for the devolved governments, and you mentioned that this bill may pave the way for strengthening these devolved governments. But one of the concern expressed is that this bill make provision for UK government to fund projects directly from UK into some of these regions, including in areas where power is otherwise devolved to the devolved administration, without their any involvement, without their say-so. That doesn't strengthen their power. If anything, it reduces their power.
No, it doesn't. What it does, it creates another avenue through which the government is able to channel the capital that is so desperately needed to get these infrastructure projects underway. I think in recent years we have experienced many of the regional parliaments or the assemblies have been in complete stalemate, and they've been in complete deadlock. So how do you break this deadlock? You have to have a mechanism built in to allow the central government to step in where it's needed. So I don't think that's actually overriding their authority. It is just allowing the government another tool through which they could break these impasse which we have experienced. Now, just picking up on what Professor Bill said earlier on the issue of state subsidy. Now, if EU has such a problem with UK seemingly wanting to, through this legislation to provide state assistance to these regional economy, then perhaps they need to revisit the Common Agricultural Policy. What does the Common Agricultural Policy
Look, I don't
do?
want to...
No, I think it's important.
No, it's not.
Because
let me stick to the point.
Policy
Sorry, can I just stick to the point? You mentioned the point about... I asked you specifically that this bill in some way take powers away from the devolved administration. I mean, Article 6 of the draft bill makes possible for UK government to directly fund a local authority on a particular, if they apply for a particular project, right? Even if that project is not approved by the devolved administration. How is that not taking power away?
It's very important to recognize a distinction here, because through the devolved powers, they obviously have a series of powers that they can operate. Okay, so they're allocated a budget for the regional assemblies, and they are wholly responsible how that budget is allocated across the many different programs, including infrastructure projects. Now, what this is seeking to do is to give them additional funding. Now,
directly to local authorities, not through the devolved administration.
Okay, so if this is an additional funding, I don't think there is anything untoward.
Why not?
For central government to say that as a one nation, we want to create an environment, and as part of our leveling up, not just
but why can you not do the channeling through the devolved governments? Why would you create a provision where you potentially bypass the devolved government? I mean, we're talking about a government that is
the word devolved, right? It has a limitation by its own definition.
I'm sorry, but listen,
you're not. Then you might as well say they are sovereign nations, right?
No, but why would you create a devolved administration?
This is a form of a federal state. We might not be the United States, but nonetheless, we have a central government.
Are you saying is it the thrust of your argument that because we are part of one unitary state, we are not a federal government, the central government should have the right and ability to inject funding wherever it wishes to?
No, additional funding. So
Yeah,
this
even
is
if it's
over and above
no, you're missing
the
the point.
allocated
You're missing the
budget
point.
for
The
the
point
regional
is-
economies.
No,
And I
you're missing
think-
the point. Point is that the reason we created devolved administration. I mean, there are some areas that we
with limitations, by
no,
the way.
the
You have to
area,
caveat that.
no,
with
the caveat
limitations.
is
Yeah.
that there are certain areas kept for UK government. We understand that. We're not talking about those areas. We're not talking about foreign policy. We're not talking about defense. We're not talking about, even income tax, although there are some elements of income tax that's devolved. What we're talking about, even in areas such as health, in areas such as education, in areas such as local development, UK government will be able to directly fund projects even where a particular policy is opposed by the devolved government. And the reason it's a concern is we're talking about a government that's writing, that seems to have no regard for the rule of law, fundamental principle of rule of law. So how do we know that it's not going to create a situation where tomorrow the government may deliberately seek to sabotage a particular government in a particular region because it doesn't like them?
No, I honestly don't think this is the case, because if you are going to apply that slant, then you're going to misread the spirit of the legislation.
So which bit is anyway? We'll come to that in a minute. Come back to you, Bill. I want to move on slightly. You are a professor of law, and one of the things that we pride ourselves is that we are a nation governed by rule of law. How do you feel that we have a government and a parliament which is happy to endorse an act criticized by almost every living serious politician with previous who occupied important positions, the Prime Minister's office, Attorney General's office, and so on?
So I think a very important point is that all ministers are obliged as ministers to obey the law, and that includes international law, and that has been confirmed by the Supreme Court in this country. So it is their obligation as ministers of the Crown to obey the law. That is why it is such an outrage when a minister of the Crown stands up and says, we are breaking international law in a limited and specific way. So we're going to steal some property in a limited and specific way. And we say, therefore, it's not a crime. Or we're going to beat somebody up in a limited and specific way, and somehow it's not a crime. I'm afraid it just doesn't wash, and ministers really have signed up to that obligation.
Do we have precedent of similar incident before?
Well, I tell you, the closest in the recent past was the prorogation of Parliament, where the Queen was advised that it was proper and legal to prorogue Parliament. And in fact, the Supreme Court, including some really conservative judges, unanimously said that that was illegal. It was breaking the law. Now, you could question then, did they know they were breaking the law when they went to the Queen and said, please prorogue Parliament? On this occasion, the Northern Ireland Secretary has actually spilled the beans publicly in Parliament. They know that they are breaking international law.
Mumshad, if you were holding any public office other than elected office, and you have said, yes, this conduct is going to break law, but we're going to proceed with it, you'd be dismissed. If you were a lawyer demonstrating such attitude, you would be debarred from practicing. Ministers take oath, especially the Lord Chancellor and Attorney General, that they're going to protect the rule of law, which includes honoring international treaty obligations. Do you think that it is right for individuals who states clearly that a particular bill is going to break the law and then pushes that bill through, such people should remain in the cabinet?
Well, first of all, that's his own interpretation. I don't, you know.
Yeah, but we're talking about the attitude. When you believe that you're breaking the law and you proceed with it, is it befitting for a Secretary of State to do an act which he believes, not may, but believes will break the law?
So are you sure he said
He said that. Well, I
will?
mean, the exact quote is that it will break the international law. This does break, not will, this does break international law in a very specific and limited way. I mean,
But
I
that's
don't
the
think
key,
there's anything-
isn't it? In a very
so
specific.
so
and
can you commit a crime in a limited and
limited-
specific way?
Limited way, you know. I think for anyone to say that he breaks international law,
Well, he says that.
by whose account? When
By your
break
government's account.
But when you break an international law or you contravene a international convention, you know, the only time you can say that you have broken international law, convention, or a particular clause when the court tells you that.
Well, you're speaking fortunately to a lawyer, and I happen to understand that. But this is the point. Your minister did not qualify. He said it does break the law.
Well, the Attorney General, who's a QC, by the way.
No, she wasn't a QC. She was given an honorary QC after she was appointed an Attorney General.
Okay, so let's not hair split. She's a QC.
No, she's a QC by virtue of her position, not a
No,
QC appointed in the ordinary course.
I beg to take issue with
Well,
that.
why take an issue? We will check that if you wish. But
No,
she
no.
was only made a QC after she became Attorney General by virtue of her position.
No, I think she rose to that position purely through merit. So anything
So
other
she
than
okay.
that takes away credibility, and it does a disservice to women who are trying to progress in a male-dominated profession.
Very
So,
unfortunate that a man like you would,
no,
if you challenge, you are most welcome to challenge what I said. We'll come back to you. Bill, what do you think is going to happen? I mean, we haven't had such precedent before where a Secretary of State so blatantly or a government so blatantly positions itself for a conduct which it believes or accepts will break the law.
I'll say again that the position of my party now is get Brexit done. We want to get Brexit done with a deal. And this action very recently, actually, as we see from reaction from all over Europe and all over the world, makes it much, much harder to do a deal. Johnson said he had an oven-ready deal with the withdrawal agreement last year, with everything tied up nicely. Now he's saying, actually, I want to undo it. And so that makes the whole process infinitely more difficult. I think the EU also wants to have a deal because it's going to be hugely disruptive for both sides if there's Brexit with no deal. But this is not the way to ensure that there's a good deal for the country.
But that's also the point, isn't it? I mean, one of the points that governments say is that you can't go to a negotiation where you are, you are not prepared to play hardball. And what this bill shows is that if the EU doesn't get its act together, UK is prepared to walk away on its own terms. If, on the other hand, UK government and the EU comes to an agreement, that will then rectify any issues that there could be in this bill.
Johnson said he had an agreement last year. Now he's saying, actually, so when Miliband said to him yesterday, look, you obviously didn't read it, I think there's quite a lot of force in that.
Right, okay, fine. Momshad, one of the other issues that this raises is that everybody wanted an exit rather sooner than later, even those who previously supported remaining within the EU. But one of the things that the current debate raises is whether we might leave the EU within, well, we've officially left, but we're still within that transition period, whether we can leave at the end of this transition period. And if we do leave, the prospect of a deal with the EU in terms of a trade deal becomes even less likely and therefore potentially jeopardize the future of our economy. Does that concern you?
It really does. It really does, because I think it would be quite disingenuous for me to sit here and say, you know, our economy will be left unharmed if we don't reach a free and comprehensive deal with one of the largest trading bloc in the world, but also
And
happens
our
to be
biggest
our
trading
neighbors.
partner.
Also happens to be our neighbors. If your house catches fire, the
Your
first
neighbor-
instinctive reaction is to call upon your neighbor. You might have a good friend, but he's in Birmingham. By the time he drives to your house, it will be completely burnt down, right? So it is in our mutual interest to have a free and fair, comprehensive deal. And, you know, those were the spirit which were captured in the Maastricht Treaty and the subsequent treaties, you know, we signed up to. You know, and that's the spirit behind the NATO as well. You know, it's not just to, you know, secure a military cooperation, but it underpins the economic and social cooperation that we have between different EU nations. So I
yes.
really hope and pray.
But
that
does this treaty makes it easier or harder?
Look, Talha bhai, you by profession are a lawyer, so I think you understand the ramification far better than I do, and perhaps you know, Professor Bill is more well placed and well equipped to answer that.
Right.
But
Okay.
from a layman's perspective, and having, you know, read, you know, the various permutations at play,
You don't necessarily believe it makes harder, and you don't see it as a barrier to reaching a deal.
I think it does.
Cool.
In a limited capacity. It does create a
Some
problem.
barrier.
Problem. But if you remember, when we were trying to reach the withdrawal agreement, it was done right at the last minute.
So you think
is
there's
not,
hope?
you know,
Bill, final word from you. Do you think this is the end of this matter?
The trouble is, it's not just one matter. We have one after another. When you count the number of U-turns made by this government, for example, on a whole series of issues which we're not going into
But that's a
tonight.
good thing. They reflect, and on reflection, they admit.
I think back to Mrs. Thatcher, you know, who is still the person revered by many Conservatives. She was my enemy, as a matter of fact. But I have to say, Mrs. Thatcher was a lawyer too. And she was the ladies not for turning. And she was the one who negotiated Maastricht. And she believed extremely strongly in the rule of law. And that when you had made and ratified a treaty, that was that. You could not back away from it. And she was absolutely firm on that, by the way. So Mrs. Thatcher is turning in her grave at the present moment.
Thank you. That's all we have time for, I'm afraid. We did invite the government and the Conservative Party to provide us with a spokesperson. We also approached the Labour Party, and we had a Labour MP to come on the show but had to pull out due to health reasons at the last minute. Our hope is that our government would uphold the rule of law, and that would include honouring international treaty, for it is our commitment to rule of law that makes us the great country that we are in. We also hope that the government will do all it can, and that our government and indeed the EU will engage in an open-hearted, in a spirit of mutual cooperation to reach a trade deal which would be beneficial to both the UK and also the EU. EU is our biggest trading partner and our neighbour, but so is UK a big and significant market for the European nations. And so we really do hope that that a deal will be reached. More importantly, we hope that ultimately, when the dust are settled, that both the government and EU and the wider political class would demonstrate greater restraint when it comes to taking steps which potentially endangers our commitment to law, and more importantly, our commitment to our international partners, be it through treaty or other obligations. I'm afraid that's all we have time for today. Until next week, thank you very much for watching this show, and thank you to my guests for committing their time, valuable time, to join us today.
thank you for having us.